Morning, everybody. My friend Michael asked a question. To what extent should we or shouldn't we equate things that God promises or says in the Old Testament to ancient Israel with the United States or any other contemporary nation? That's a great question because you see God invoked, of course, a lot, especially in American national identity. There's kind of a narrative that's especially popular among evangelicals, which says that there was a faithful remnant from the New Testament times through various religious movements that much of the church had fallen away, lost the core of the gospel. But there was a few who remained faithful throughout every age. And there are books that have been written in the past that kind of trace that faithful remnant, it's called. And of course, that remnant includes people who fled religious persecution in England to found the United States of America. And a big part of them finding the American nation, so this narrative goes, was so they could have religious freedom. And so our country was a nation built on faith in God, God's laws, God's ideas, God's principles, God's morals. And as America has strayed more and more from God's morals and God's laws, we become more and more cursed, less and less blessed. And the way to be blessed again as a country, as a nation, is to return to God. And then they see parallels of this with the Old Testament. God spoke many times about Israel and Judah, the different nations, or the united monarchy of the nation of Israel, that God would bless those people if they followed the laws, and he would curse them if they didn't follow the laws. They obviously got cursed as Judah got conquered, and Israel, the northern country, also got conquered in 587 BC and 722 BC respectively. So that showed that they strayed from God, so they got judged through military losses and through national decadence and not being prosperous as a country. The problem with this is nationalism, the idea that we find our identity primarily in the nation. So pride for the motherland, associate that with Russians and pride in being Russian and Mother Russia. In the United States of America, we have a lot of national pride and patriotism, but the idea that you put your country before yourself, your nation before yourself, and the identity as an American trumps your identity as an individual first, that's called nationalism. The idea that a nation defines who you are and it should be more important than your own individual identity. So nationalism is kind of the foundation of this theology, because the idea is there's a nation that's favored by God, and if they honor and follow God, they continue to experience that favor. And if they cease to continue in that, they'll become cursed and lose the favor. The problem with that is the idea of nationalism, of the nation being primary importance, is very recent. Maybe 1700s is where most historians would put that. So just a few hundred years old. And of course, the Bible was written, let's just say as a general rule, Bible was written, maybe 600 BC all the way through 100 AD, generally speaking. So you have the different books of the Bible that were written during that time, and that was written long before nationalism became a prominent way for a social group to define their identity. Before that, people tended to define their identities based on ethnicity. Well, there were a few things, but kind of most of it had to do with the people they came from and not the nation itself. There were nation states, of course, that had pride in their nations, and people would put the group before themselves, but that has more to do with the difference of values, that honor was more valued than happiness, and honor was seen as a goal of life, so sacrificing your life to preserve the honor, especially of your family, but also sometimes of your people, but mostly your family, was seen as a noble thing to do, and individual happiness was not the goal. So that difference in values kind of shows how people value the group and collective consciousness and collective honor and prestige, and still do in many parts of the world, more than individual honor and prestige. So what I'm saying is nationalism is a recent way for humans to define their identity, and because the Bible was not written during nationalism, that means we should not equate things that God promises or says to Old Testament to ancient Israel with any other nation, because that literature was written before nationalism existed. And so I'm not saying you can't do this. People do this all the time in their personal theology, but it doesn't work for me because nationalism is recent and it is a modern way to conceive of the individual and their placing in society. And so I think the Bible is transnational, that it transcends national identity, that the gospel of Christ sits in judgment of all nations, of all countries, and that our allegiance should be primarily to Jesus before any nation or national identity. And I understand the allure of combining your nationalism and your patriotism with your faith. And I don't judge people for doing that. I'm not mad at them for doing it. I'm very blessed to be born in the United States, to be an American. I do love my country, even though it has a very, what should we say, complicated relationship with the goodness and with evil. I'm not naive about that, but I do feel blessed to be an American. But I don't believe that Americans are intrinsically superior to anybody else of any other nation, and I don't define anybody by the nation they belong to. I define them as children of God that He made on purpose in His image, who are of infinite value, who need to be valued and cared for and treated with dignity, regardless of their life situation, their opinions, or the mistakes they've made. So, my personal theology, yours might be different. If yours works for you, go for it. But I do not think we should equate the things God promises to the Old Testament, to Israel, with any other nation state today, because cross-applying the promises to a group of people, basically a tribe, cross-applying the promises that God made to a large tribe or a small nation in the Old Testament world that existed for a time to any other nation state, especially in the context of contemporary nationalism, to me is completely anachronistic, historically inappropriate, and theologically inappropriate.